There are words a man can say that instantly change the balance of a relationship. Not loud words, not angry words, quiet ones, calm ones, words that don't threaten, words that don't beg, words that signal something far more dangerous to a dysfunctional dynamic that you're no longer afraid. Most men will never say these words, not because they're cruel, but because they've been trained not to, and the training is costing them their relationships, their self respect, and eventually their sanity. Welcome back to the channel. This is the Relationship Mind, a place for men who are done guessing, done walking on eggshells, and ready to understand what actually works in real relationships using practical psychology you can apply immediately. No theory, no fluff, just reality. And brother, today's story is one you need to hear all the way through. I got an email a few months ago from a guy I'll call Mark. He's 41, lives in Ohio, works as a regional operations manager for a mid sized manufacturing firm, married for 10 years, two kids, mortgage, minivan. From the outside, he's the guy everyone points to and says he's doing well. From the inside, he told me he felt like he'd been slowly erased. Mark wrote, I thought I was being a good husband. I thought compromise meant maturity. I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as love. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being a man and became background noise. That didn't happen overnight. It never does. No man wakes up one day and decides to disappear. It happens in inches, quietly, politely, with good intentions. When Mark met his wife, Lauren, he was solid, not flashy, but grounded. He had friends he saw regularly, opinions he expressed without apology. He made decisions and stood by them. That's what attracted her in the first place. She liked that he was steady, certain, comfortable in his own skin. The first crack came early, small thing. Mark had planned a long weekend fishing trip with two college friends, guys he'd known since his 20s. Lauren didn't love the idea. She wanted him home. He went anyway, thinking healthy couples don't smother each other. When he got back, she was cold, not yelling. Worse, distant short answers, sighs, passive comments about how she guessed she just wasn't a priority. Mark learned something that weekend, not consciously, emotionally. Conflict had consequences. So next time he chose differently. He skipped the trip, then another, then another. He told himself it was temporary, mature, selfless. Then came the opinions. When he disagreed with her, things got tense. So he stopped disagreeing. When she criticized how he handled something, he apologized. Even when he wasn't wrong, when she was upset, he rushed to fix it. He became excellent at reading moods, anticipating reactions, smoothing friction before it turned into anything sharp. He thought this was love. He thought this was emotional intelligence. He thought this was what good men did. What he didn't see was the pattern forming underneath. Every time he folded, he shrank. And every time he shrank, something in Lauren shifted. Her respect didn't increase. It quietly drained away. And as that respect faded, her demands grew. The rules changed. Her moods became law. Her standards became absolute. Mark's job became emotional maintenance. By year 6, he told me he felt like a ghost in his own house. He paid the bills, showed up, did what was asked, but he wasn't consulted. He wasn't challenged. He wasn't admired. He was managed. There was one moment that finally cut through the fog. They were at a backyard cookout with neighbors. Casual beers, laughter. One of the women joked about her husband being useless with the kids. Everyone laughed. Then Lauren added, smiling, "At least he tries. Mark just kind of exists." People laughed again. Mark laughed too. Reflex. Survival. That night, lying in bed, that word echoed in his head. Exists. Not leads, not chooses. Exists like a couch or a lamp. Useful. Replaceable. Silent. Here's the brutal part, brother. Lauren didn't turn him into that. Mark did. With every apology that wasn't earned, every silence that should have been a boundary, every moment he chose peace over self-respect, society told him this was noble. Happy wife, happy life. What they don't tell you is that surrender doesn't create gratitude. It creates contempt. By the time Mark realized something was wrong, the dynamic was already locked in, and he was convinced the problem was him not trying hard enough. But here's the question that changed everything for him, and it might change everything for you. If giving more, apologizing more, and shrinking more hasn't fixed it, what if the problem is the strategy itself, Hold that thought. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. If any part of Mark's story feels uncomfortably familiar, drop a comment with one word, "seen." Just that. And if this is the kind of honest, grounded breakdown you've been looking for, subscribe and join a growing community of men who are rebuilding strength, clarity, and self respect without anger, without games, and without losing themselves. Here's what Mark couldn't see while he was inside the marriage. Things weren't getting worse because his wife was becoming cruel. They were getting worse because a system had formed, a system where every time pressure appeared, he collapsed inward. And that collapse sent a signal he never intended to send. Every woman tests. Not because she's manipulative, not because she's malicious, but because testing is instinctive. It's how she gauges emotional strength, stability, leadership, whether the man in front of her can hold his ground when things get uncomfortable. And brother, comfort is not the metric, pressure is. Mark thought the arguments were about dishes, about texts not returned fast enough, about forgetting to schedule the HVAC inspection. But none of that was the point. The issue was never the issue. The real question underneath every conflict was simple. Will you stand firm or will you fold? And Mark folded every time. There are a few classic tests, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. The first is what I call the drama test. Something small turns into something heavy. A neutral comment becomes a critique. A delay becomes disrespect. The goal isn't resolution, it's reaction. She's watching how you respond under emotional pressure. Mark's response was always the same: immediate apology, over explanation, emotional scrambling. He'd try to prove he wasn't the bad guy. He'd try to soothe. He'd try to fix. From his perspective, he was being considerate. From her nervous system's perspective, he was unstable, easily moved, easily controlled. Then there's the comparison test. Jessica's husband just surprised her with a weekend in Charleston. My coworker's partner always makes time for date nights. The content doesn't matter, the frame does. The frame says, "You are inadequate, and someone else is doing better." A grounded man responds to this with calm indifference or self-rust. Mark absorbed it. He accepted the premise that he was falling short. He promised to do better. He reinforced the idea that her evaluation defined his worth. And then there's the most destructive one, the threat test. Maybe we rushed into this. Sometimes I wonder if I married the wrong person. I don't know if I can do this forever. These aren't statements. They're probes. They're checking one thing. Do you panic? Mark panicked. Every time he begged, he reassured. He promised change. He tried to negotiate his way back into safety. And every time he did that, something inside Lauren tightened instead of relaxing. Because what she needed in those moments wasn't reassurance. It was strength. Here's the part most men don't understand. When a woman tests and a man fails, she doesn't feel powerful. She feels anxious. Something in her says, if he can't handle me, how does he handle the world? So she tests again, harder, louder, more often. Not to punish him, but to finally find the edge he keeps proving he doesn't have. Mark told me the breaking point came on a random Tuesday. He'd had a brutal day at work. A major contract was at risk. He came home hoping for support. Instead, Lauren was already wound up about something he'd forgotten to follow up on. He apologized. She escalated. He apologized more. She stacked grievances. He absorbed all of them. Then she said it calmly, almost bored. You know what your problem is? You're just there. I can't rely on you to lead anything. I feel like I have to handle everything myself. That sentence hit him harder than yelling ever could, because buried inside it was contempt, not anger, disgust. And the most dangerous moment wasn't what she said. It was what he almost did next. He almost apologized again. He told me he felt the words forming automatically like muscle memory. And then something snapped. Not rage, clarity. He saw himself standing in his own kitchen in a house he paid for being told he wasn't a man. And his first instinct was to make it better for her. That night, he sat alone in his car in the driveway for nearly 2 hours. No music, no phone, just the realization settling in. His submission hadn't created peace. It had created a tyrant. His patience hadn't earned respect. It had erased it. His vulnerability hadn't deepened intimacy. It had made him predictable and safe in the worst way. Here's the truth, brother. There's a difference between being emotionally available and being emotionally dependent. Mark had confused the two. He'd handed over emotional regulation of his entire life and called it love. And once you see that distinction, you can't go back because then the question becomes unavoidable. If anger doesn't work, pleading doesn't work, and threats don't work, what actually shifts the dynamic? That's where everything changed. If this part hit close to home, I want you to comment one word tests. Just that. Let it lock in and sit with it. What Mark discovered next didn't come from anger or ultimatums or a dramatic confrontation. It came from something far more unsettling to the existing dynamic: emotional independence, not coldness, not cruelty, independence. And the first thing he had to understand was this: women don't fear a man who's loud, they fear a man who's unmoved. Mark spent the next few months doing something he'd never done before. He stopped reacting, not in a passive aggressive way, not to punish, but because he finally understood the real source of power in the relationship. It wasn't dominance, it wasn't control, it was need. And he had been bleeding need for years. A woman's leverage in a relationship comes from how much a man needs her approval, her validation, her presence. If he needs her to feel okay, she controls the thermostat. If he needs her to stay, she controls the exits. If he needs her praise, she controls his self image. Remove the need, and the leverage evaporates. The first shift happened during one of Lauren's routine critiques. Mark doesn't even remember what it was about, something small, something that would normally spiral. The old pattern was automatic. She criticizes, he explains, she escalates, he apologizes, she stays cold, he chases. That was the script. This time he tried something new, calm, almost boring. He looked at her and said, "Yeah, you're probably right. I could have handled that better." Then he turned back to what he was doing. No defense, no over-relaxation, no emotional charge. Lauren froze. This wasn't how the scene was supposed to go. She waited for the justification, the self-fragilization, the reassurance. It didn't come. "That's it?" she asked. "You're not going to say anything else?" Mark shrugged. "What else is there to say?" "You're right, and that was it. No tension to escalate, no resistance to push against." The drama had nowhere to land. That was the first word women fear. Not because it's aggressive, but because it removes ammunition. Agreement without submission. A week later came the silent treatment. Something trivial had triggered it. Mark didn't chase, didn't ask what was wrong, didn't try to fix the mood. He simply mirrored. She was distant. He was distant. She was quiet. He was quiet. Not sulking, not performative, just neutral. By day 2, Lauren cracked. "Are you going to tell me what's wrong with you?" she asked. Mark answered calmly. "Nothing's wrong with me. I just figured you wanted space, so I'm giving you space." She started to object, then stopped because the mirror was too clean. Her own behavior reflected back at her without commentary. This was the second thing women fear. Their tactics rendered ineffective by a man who's comfortable without engagement. But the real test, the one that changes everything, came during their biggest fight in years. Lauren had been building toward it for days. Criticisms, comparisons, little digs. Then she dropped the line she'd used before, the one that always worked. "Maybe we should just get divorced. Maybe we'd both be happier." The old Mark would have panicked, promised change, begged, tried to pull her back from the edge. This time, he didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He looked at her and said one word. "Okay," she blinked. "What?" "Okay," he repeated. "If that's what you want, we can talk about it. I'm not going to beg you to stay." The room shifted, not because he threatened her, but because he accepted the possibility she'd been using as a weapon. "You don't even care if I leave?" she asked. "I care about you," Mark said, "but I'm not going to destroy myself trying to be enough for someone who's already decided I'm not. I can live without this marriage. I don't want to, but I can." That's the third thing women fear. Not abandonment, but a man who doesn't fear abandonment. Lauren cried. Real tears, not manipulation. Something in her finally relaxed because the game was over. The leverage was gone. That conversation didn't magically fix everything, but it shattered the hierarchy. Her power had depended on his need. When the need disappeared, So did the crown. Over the next months, Mark kept speaking truth. When she compared him to other men, he said, "Those men have wives who appreciate them. Maybe that's the difference." When she criticized his efforts, he said, "I'm doing what I think is right. If it's not enough, you're free to find someone else." When she tried to use affection as currency, he said, "I'm not interested in being rewarded for good behavior." Each statement carried the same message: I have standards. I don't need your approval. I'm choosing you, not clinging to you. And paradoxically, that's when attraction returned, not comfort. Attraction, the kind that exists when a woman feels she's with a man who could walk away and doesn't need to prove anything. If this part clicked for you, comment one word: indifference. Not as coldness as freedom. What happened next wasn't magic. It wasn't manipulation. And it definitely wasn't Mark winning anything. What happened was a return to reality. And reality, brother, is stabilizing when it finally shows up. Here's what most people miss when they hear stories like this: female testing isn't cruelty, it's instinct. On a deep biological level, a woman is scanning for emotional strength the same way a radar scans for solid ground. Evolutionary psychology backs this up. A man who collapses under pressure signals instability. A man who stays centered under stress signals safety, not comfort safety. When a woman tests and a man fails, she doesn't feel satisfied. She feels uneasy. Something feels off. The relationship loses tension in the worst way. So she becomes more critical, more demanding, more reactive. Not because she wants power, but because she's unconsciously searching for something solid to lean against. When Mark stopped reacting, something in Lauren finally settled. The testing slowed, not because she lost interest, but because she found what she'd been probing for all along: a man who wasn't trying to control her, a man who couldn't be controlled. That's why this works. Not because indifference is attractive by itself, but because it signals completeness. A man with a full life, internal standards, and emotional self regulation doesn't need to dominate. He doesn't need to beg. He doesn't need to perform. His presence alone sets the frame. This is where a lot of men get it wrong. They hear women fear indifference and think it means being cold, distant, or dismissive. That's not it. This isn't about treating women badly. It's about treating yourself well enough that no one can use your need against you. When Mark said he could live without Lauren, he wasn't threatening her. He was stating a fact. He'd rebuilt his life quietly, reconnected with friends, got back into lifting, started hunting again on weekends, took ownership of his time. His purpose no longer lived inside the relationship. The relationship became an addition, not the foundation. That single shift dismantled an illusion many women grow up with: the illusion of being indispensable. Culture feeds it. Social media inflates it. Years of male submission reinforce it. When every man tolerates bad behavior feels normal. When no one ever leaves, accountability disappears. The words women fear confront that illusion gently but firmly, not with cruelty, with reality. You're not above consequence, neither am I. You don't get a pedestal, neither do I. We meet as equals or not at all. That's why speaking truth isn't just self preservation, it's healthier for both people. A man who never pushes back enables behavior. A woman won't respect either. He helps create a version of her she eventually resents. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're structure. Mark had a choice. Every man does. He could keep the false peace, keep apologizing, keep shrinking, maintain the external image of a marriage while slowly dying inside. Or he could speak truth, risk everything, and accept whatever outcome came from being real. He chose truth. The marriage didn't end, it transformed. Lauren didn't become perfect, but she became different. The comparison stopped. The threat stopped. The contempt faded. Not because Mark controlled her, but because he stopped tolerating disrespect. The hierarchy collapsed. Equality returned. Attraction followed. Not the anxious attachment of a man trying to earn love, but the grounded connection of two adults choosing each other. Mark wrote me again months later. He said, "The first few months were rough. She tested harder. The fights were real, but I wasn't afraid anymore. And when she saw I wasn't afraid, something changed. She treats me like a partner now, and for the first time in years, I feel like myself." Brother, the core message is simple. Women fear hearing that you don't need them. And paradoxically, only men who don't need them can truly love them. Because love from need is a transaction, love from wholeness is a choice. You have a decision to make: stay silent and keep disappearing, or speak truth and risk losing what was never real to begin with. The man you were before submission still exists. He hasn't vanished, he's waiting. If this resonated, comment one word: truth. Let it anchor. And if you're ready to stop guessing and start rebuilding yourself with clarity and strength, subscribe and join a growing community of men who are choosing self respect over comfort and reality over illusion. Stand firm, speak truth, respect yourself, respect.